The hollow ones were born without a scent, and in a world where scent was everything, that made Revka nothing. She had no pack, no mate, no place among the wolves who could smell each other's joy, grief, and desire, but could smell nothing from her at all. To them, she was a ghost, walking among the living, a curse wrapped in skin. So when Revka found the dying cub abandoned in the frost, she didn't think about consequences. She simply gathered the small, shivering body into her arms and held on. The child was nearly 4 winters old, his lips blue, and his heartbeat fading beneath her palms. And Revka felt something stir in her chest, something she'd never understood. A pull, a warmth, a desperate need to give this small creature whatever life she had left. She didn't notice the soldiers until they surrounded her. She didn't notice the crowd parting like water until silence crashed over the marketplace. And she didn't understand why the Alpha King of Valdrin, a man whose name was spoken in whispers and whose face was carved from winter itself, stepped forward, looked at her holding his dying heir, and fell to his knees in the snow. Kings did not kneel, not to anyone. Certainly not to hollow Omegas who smelled of nothing and meant even less. But Severin knelt, and when he lifted his eyes to hers, Revka saw something that terrified her more than any cruelty ever had. Desperation, grief, and hope. "You," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "You're the one." She didn't know what he meant. She didn't know that this moment would bind them together in a bargain neither could escape. She didn't know that saving this child would either save her or destroy them all. The market square of Valdrin was no place for a hollow Omega. Revka knew this. She'd known it since she was old enough to understand why people flinched when she passed, why merchants refused her coin, why even the beggars turned away rather than share a fire with a wolf who carried no scent. In a world governed by the language of the nose, she was mute, silent, empty. The other wolves could smell each other's rank and bloodline, could scent arousal and anger and fear. They could track their packmates across mountains and identify strangers from a single breath. But when they inhaled near Revka, they smelled nothing at all, as if she didn't exist, as if she were a hole cut into the fabric of their world. "Hollow," they called her, the polite ones. "Cursed," said the others. "Abomination," whispered the rest. Today, Revka moved through the crowd with her hood pulled low and her shoulders hunched. She'd come to sell herbs, just enough to afford bread for another week. The dried bundles of feverfew and yarrow hung from her belt, marking her as a healer of sorts, though no respectable household would hire a scentless wolf to tend their sick. She kept her eyes down. She did not speak. She made herself as small as possible, because small meant invisible, and invisible meant safe. That was when she heard the cry. It was thin, weak, the sound of something too young and too fragile to fight whatever was killing it. Revka's head snapped up before she could stop herself. The crowd shifted, annoyed, and through a gap between 2 merchant stalls she saw it. A child. A small wolf cub, nearly 4 winters old, lying crumpled in the shadowed gap between buildings. His skin was gray. His lips were blue. His chest rose and fell in shallow, stuttering breaths that seemed to cost him everything he had. No one stopped. No one even looked. A woman hurried past, her nose wrinkling. "Smells like death," she muttered to her companion. "Probably gutter-borne. Someone should alert the disposal crews." Revka's feet moved before her mind could object. She pushed past the woman, ignoring the hiss of disgust, and dropped to her knees beside the cub. He was so small, so cold. His little fingers were curled into fists, and his breath rattled in his chest like stones in a dry riverbed. "Shh," Revka whispered, gathering him into her arms. "Shh, little one. I have you." The moment she touched him, something happened. A warmth bloomed in her chest, unfamiliar and overwhelming, spreading down through her arms and into her hands. The cub shuddered against her. His breathing eased, just slightly, just enough. Revka didn't understand what she'd done. She only knew that the child was dying and she couldn't let him die. "Hold on," she breathed, pressing him closer. "Please hold on." The cub's eyes fluttered open. They were pale as winter moons, luminous and strange, and when they focused on her face, his cracked lips parted. "Mama?" he whispered. Revka's chest constricted. "I'm here," she lied, because what else could she say? "I'm here. You're safe now." She didn't notice the crowd falling silent. She didn't notice the soldiers materializing at the edges of the square, their armor gleaming, and their hands on their weapons. She didn't notice the heavy footsteps approaching until a shadow fell over her. "Step away from the child." The voice was deep, cold, commanding in a way that made every wolf in the square bow their heads instinctively. Revka looked up, and the Alpha King of Valdrin looked down. She'd heard stories about Severin. Everyone had. They said he was the most powerful alpha born in 7 generations. They said he'd killed his own brother to take the throne. They said he had no heart, no mercy, no warmth. That winter lived in his bones, and ice ran through his veins. Looking at him now, Revka believed every word. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to block out the pale winter sun. His hair was black as a moonless night, cut short and severe. His face was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp angles and harder edges, a jaw carved from granite, cheekbones that could cut glass, but it was his eyes that stole her breath. Pale gray, like frost on stone. Cold and piercing and utterly devoid of warmth. "I said," he repeated, each word a shard of ice. "Step away from the child." Revka's arms tightened around the cub. "He's dying." "I'm aware. If I let go, he'll die faster." The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those frozen eyes. "What are you doing to him?" "I don't know." The truth spilled out before she could stop it. I touched him, and he breathed easier. I don't understand it. But I won't let go. I won't let him die alone in the street like garbage while people step over him." Silence. The soldiers shifted uneasily. The crowd held its breath. And Severin, Alpha King of Valdrin, stared at the hollow Omega, holding his dying air as if she'd just spoken in a language he'd never heard. Then, slowly, impossibly, he lowered himself to his knees. The gasps rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. A king did not kneel. Not to nobles, not to gods. Certainly not to a scentless Omega cradling a sick child in a dirty marketplace. But Severin knelt. His frost-laden gaze never left her face. Up close, she could see the dark circles beneath his eyes, the lines of exhaustion etched around his mouth. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in years, a man held together by duty and desperation and nothing else. "You're hollow," he said quietly. Not a question. Revka lifted her chin. "Yes. You have no scent." "I'm aware of my own curse, Your Majesty." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. "Do you know what you're holding?" Revka looked down at the cub, at his luminous eyes and his labored breathing, and the way his small fist had curled into her cloak. A dying child. "My son," Severin said, "my only heir. And you're the first person who's been able to ease his suffering in nearly 4 years." The world tilted beneath Revka's feet. The king's son. She was holding the crown prince of Valdrin, and he was dying in her arms. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." "Of course you didn't." Severin's voice was flat, empty, but his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. "No one knows. No one can know. But you." He leaned closer, and Revka caught his scent for the first time. Winter. Snow. the cold clarity of a frozen lake. And underneath it, buried so deep she almost missed it, grief. "You're the one I've been searching for," he said. "For nearly 4 years I've sent scouts to every corner of the realm looking for a hollow Omega. They're supposed to be extinct. A myth. But here you are." Revka's pulse hammered against her ribs. "I don't understand." Severin's hand rose slowly, carefully, and his cold fingers brushed the cub's forehead. The child sighed in his sleep, nestling deeper into Revka's arms. "You will," the king said. "Come with me to the palace, and I'll explain everything." His winter-colored eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her want to run. "And then you're going to help me save my son." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command. It was a statement of absolute fact, spoken by a man who had clearly never been refused anything in his life. Revka should have said no. She should have handed over the child and disappeared into the crowd and gone back to her invisible, miserable, safe little existence. But the cub's fingers were still curled into her cloak. His breathing had steadied against her chest. And when she looked into Severin's desperate, frost-laden eyes, she saw something she recognized: loneliness. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll come." The king rose to his feet in one fluid motion, gesturing to his guards. "Prepare the carriage. Tell no one what you've seen. Anyone who speaks of today will lose their tongue." The soldiers scattered. Severin extended his hand to her, and after a moment's hesitation, Revka took it. His skin was ice cold. She should have known then. She should have understood that a man this cold, this powerful, this desperate, was hiding something far more dangerous than a sick child. But she didn't. Not until it was too late. The carriage moved through the city like a blade through silk, the crowds parting before the royal crest emblazoned on its doors. Inside, Revka sat rigid on the velvet seat, the cub still cradled in her arms, and tried not to stare at the king seated across from her. Severin hadn't spoken since they'd left the marketplace. He sat perfectly still, his pale eyes fixed on his son's sleeping face, his expression revealing nothing. But his scent, betrayed him. Beneath the winter cold, Revka caught flickers of something raw. Fear, grief, the desperate, strangled hope of a man holding onto the edge of a cliff. The cub stirred against her chest. His breathing had steadied further during the ride, his color slowly returning from gray to pale pink. Whatever she'd done, whatever strange warmth had flowed from her hands into his small body, it seemed to be working. She just didn't understand how. "His name is Oren," Severin said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "After my grandfather." Revka looked down at the child. Oren. It suited him somehow. Soft and strong at once. "He's nearly 4?" she asked quietly. "Yes, though he should be larger, stronger. The curse stunts their growth, makes them fragile." He said the word like it tasted bitter on his tongue. Revka's breath caught. "Curse?" Severin's eyes finally lifted to meet hers, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. This was not a man sharing information. This was a man making a calculation. "We'll discuss it at the palace," he said, in private. The palace of Valdrin rose from the cliffs like a frozen cathedral, all gray stone and sharp spires and windows that reflected the winter sky like countless watching eyes. Guards lined the entrance, their faces blank and their posture rigid. None of them so much as glanced at Revka, but she felt their attention anyway. The hollow Omega, being escorted into the palace by the king himself. Carrying the heir no one knew existed, a woman waited in the grand entrance hall. She was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of beauty that had hardened with age into something formidable. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, moved from Severin to Revka to the child in Revka's arms. "You found one," she breathed. "After all this time, you actually found one." "Lady Morvain," Severin said curtly. Prepare the east wing. The Omega will stay there until further notice. Lady Morvaine's lips pressed into a thin line. Your Majesty, with respect, the council should be informed. The council will know what I decide to tell them. Severin's voice dropped to a register that made even Revka flinch. No one speaks of this. No one enters the East Wing without my permission. And if I discover that anyone has been asking questions about our guest, I will personally ensure they never ask anything again. Lady Morvaine bowed stiffly. As you command, Your Majesty. She swept away, her silver hair trailing behind her like a flag of surrender. Revka's grip on Oren tightened. She doesn't like me. Lady Morvaine doesn't like anyone, Severin said flatly, but she's loyal. She raised me after my mother died. She'll keep your presence secret. Why does it need to be secret? The king's moonlit stare met hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker beneath the ice. Weariness, resignation, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. Come, he said instead of answering. We need to talk. Privately. He led her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past tapestries depicting ancient hunts and battles, past doors that whispered secrets, past servants who bowed and averted their eyes. Finally, they reached a chamber at the end of a long hallway, guarded by two soldiers who stepped aside without a word. Inside, a fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across walls lined with books and maps. A massive desk dominated one corner, buried under documents. But it was the bed in the center of the room that drew Revka's attention. Small, child-sized, surrounded by strange devices, glass vials and copper tubes, crystals that pulsed with faint light. This is where he sleeps, Severin said quietly. When he can sleep at all. Revka moved to the bed and gently laid Oren down on the soft furs. The cub whimpered at the loss of contact, reaching for her with small hands, and something in Revka's chest ached. Shh, she whispered, stroking his hair. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Behind her, Severin watched in silence. You asked about the curse, he said finally. Sit. This will take time. Revka settled into a chair beside the bed, her hands still resting on Oren's small chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. Severin remained standing, his back to the fire, his face half in shadow. 300 years ago, he began, my ancestor made a bargain. He wanted power, dominion, an empire that would last forever, and he was willing to pay any price to get it. Revka's throat tightened. Bargains with power always came with prices. He sought out a witch, Severin continued, not an ordinary one, an ancient being who traded in souls and bloodlines and the deepest desires of desperate men. She gave him everything he asked for, power beyond measure, an empire that would never fall, a bloodline that would rule for eternity. His voice dropped, but she took something in return. Something he didn't understand until it was too late. What? Revka whispered. Severin's pale gaze met hers, and in them she saw centuries of grief. His heirs, he said, every child born to the kings of Valdrin is cursed to die before their 7th year, before their first shift, before they ever truly become wolves. The fire crackled. The shadows danced, and Revka felt the blood drain from her face. Every heir, she repeated, for 300 years? Every single one. Severin's voice was hollow. My father lost 4 children before me. I was the first to survive, but only because my mother made her own bargain. She promised the curse her life in exchange for mine on the night I was born. He paused, his jaw tightening. But the curse didn't take her immediately. It let her live long enough to raise me, to love my father despite knowing he could never love her back. And when the weight of that one-sided love became unbearable, she threw herself from the cliffs. Revka's stomach dropped. Oren's mother knew the risks when she chose to bear my child, he continued. She survived the birth but barely. She refused to eat afterward, refused to live. She faded away within weeks, leaving me with a son I couldn't save and a curse I couldn't break. He looked at Oren, and for a moment his composure cracked. Now history repeats itself. Every day since his birth I've watched my son slip further away. Revka's hand trembled against Oren's chest. There has to be a way to break it. There is. Severin stepped closer, and the firelight carved his features into something almost inhuman. The witch left instructions, buried in the old texts, hidden in riddles and metaphors. It took me years to decipher them, but I finally understand. He stopped beside the bed, looking down at his sleeping son with something that might have been love, or might have been despair. The curse can only be absorbed, he said, drawn out of the air and into a vessel that carries no essence of its own, a hollow. His eyes lifted to Revka. You! The room spun. Revka gripped the arm of her chair to steady herself. You want me to absorb the curse? I want you to save my son. Severin's voice cracked just slightly before he controlled it. I'm not asking you to sacrifice yourself. The texts say a hollow can contain the curse, hold it in balance, and keep it from killing the child. You wouldn't die. You'd just carry it. And if the texts are wrong? Silence. Severin looked away, and in that moment Revka saw the truth. He didn't know. He couldn't be certain. He was asking her to gamble her life on ancient riddles and desperate hope. I will give you everything, he said quietly. Wealth, protection, a title. You will be my mate in name, honored and respected throughout the kingdom. Oren will be your son in every way that matters. You will want for nothing. Except my freedom, Revka said. My choice. You had no freedom in that marketplace. His voice was soft, but it cut like a blade. You had no choice when people spat at you for being hollow. I'm offering you a life, Revka. A real one. All I ask in return is that you help me save my child. She should say no. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to escape this palace and this cursed king and his dying heir. But Oren's small hand had found hers. His fingers curled around her thumb, holding on with surprising strength for a child so fragile. Mama, he'd called her. In that filthy alley with death rattling in his chest, he'd looked at her and called her Mama. There are conditions, Revka said slowly. If I agree. Severin's eyes sharpened. Name them. I want to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If I'm going to carry this curse, I need to understand it completely. Agreed. And I want Oren to be told the truth when he's old enough. I won't raise him on lies. A muscle twitched in Severin's jaw, but he nodded. Agreed. And one more thing. Revka lifted her chin, meeting his frosty gaze without flinching. You called me your mate. If I do this, if I bind myself to your son and your curse, what exactly does that make me to you? The question hung between them like a blade. Severin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his scent. The winter cold deepened, hardened, became something almost painful to breathe. You will be my mate in name only, he said, each word precise and deliberate. You will have my protection and my resources, but you will not have my heart. I will never love you, Revka. I am incapable of it. And you must never love me. The words should have hurt. Maybe they did, somewhere deep beneath the numbness spreading through her chest. But Revka had spent her entire life being unloved, being hollow, being nothing. At least this nothing came with a purpose. Then we have an agreement, she said. Severin extended his hand, and she took it. His skin was ice cold, just like before. But this time, she felt something else beneath the frost. A tremor. Faint, but unmistakable. As if the king himself was shaking. The announcement came 3 days later. Revka stood in the grand throne room, dressed in silk she'd never imagined touching, surrounded by nobles she'd never imagined meeting, and listened to the king declare her his chosen mate. The reactions ranged from confusion to outrage to barely concealed disgust. A hollow Omega? Elevated to queen? The whispers started before Severin had even finished speaking. She has no scent, someone hissed. She's not even a real wolf. The king has gone mad. There must be some explanation. Revka kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, and her face carefully blank. This was part of the bargain. She would be displayed, discussed, dissected by a court that would never accept her. But she would endure it. For Oren. The cub was not present for the announcement. He was too fragile to be seen in public, too precious to be exposed to the vultures circling the throne. But Revka could feel him somehow, a warmth at the edge of her consciousness, a tether that had formed the moment she'd first held him. The ceremony will take place in 1 week, Severin continued, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through fog. Any questions regarding the arrangement may be directed to Lady Morvain. Any objections may be directed to me personally. He paused, letting the threat settle. I trust there will be none. The court fell silent. Afterward, Revka was led to a private chamber where she was measured and poked and examined by a team of seamstresses who discussed her like she wasn't present. She endured it, staring at the wall, counting the stones until the ordeal was over. Lady Morvain appeared as the seamstresses were leaving. The king wishes to see you, she said, her tone carefully neutral. In his study. Revka followed her through the winding corridors, aware of the woman's assessing gaze on her back. You know, Lady Morvain said quietly, I've served 3 kings. I've seen countless schemes, countless ambitious women trying to claw their way to power. But you... She paused, turning to study Revka with those sharp, pale eyes. You're not ambitious. You're not scheming. So what are you? Revka met her gaze steadily. I'm someone who wants to help a dying child. Lady Morvain's expression flickered. And that's all? That's all. A long pause. Then, unexpectedly, the older woman's lips curved into something that might have been approval. Perhaps you'll survive longer than I expected, she murmured. This way. The study was warm, the fire burning higher than before. Severin stood by the window, his back to the room, staring out at the frozen landscape beyond. Leave us, he said, without turning. Lady Morvain bowed and withdrew, closing the door behind her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Revka studied the king's rigid posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clasped behind his back so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The court doesn't accept me, she said finally. You know that. The court will accept what I tell them to accept. And if they don't? Severin turned. In the firelight, his pale eyes looked almost gold. Then they'll learn, he said quietly, that my tolerance for disobedience is extremely limited. Something in his tone made Revka shiver. Not from fear, from something else entirely. I've been sitting with Oren, she said, changing the subject. His condition is worse than you told me. Severin's expression tightened. I know. He wakes up crying. He doesn't understand why his body hurts. He asks me why he can't run like the other children, why he can't play, why he's always so tired. Revka's voice wavered despite herself. He's not even 4 years old, Severin. He should be chasing butterflies and making mischief, not fighting to take each breath. You think I don't know that? The words came out harsh, broken. You think I haven't spent every night for nearly 4 years watching my son suffer? Knowing I can't stop it? Knowing that every day he survives is borrowed time? He turned away, one hand rising to press against his eyes. And in that moment, Revka saw past the ice, past the crown and the power and the carefully constructed armor. She saw a father losing his child, one breath at a time. "When does the binding ritual happen?" she asked softly. Severin lowered his hand. "After the mating ceremony. We'll need to be bonded first, at least in name, before your hollow nature can connect to his bloodline. And once we're bonded, once I'm connected to Orin, what happens then?" The king was silent for a long moment. "Then we'll know," he said finally, "whether the ancient texts were right, or whether I've just condemned us all." Before Revka could respond, a knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Severin called, his voice shifting back to cold authority. A guard stepped inside, his face pale. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's a visitor. She's demanding an audience." "Who?" The guard swallowed. "Lady Thessaly, Your Majesty. Your sister." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Revka watched as Severin's expression transformed, the vulnerable father vanishing beneath layers of ice so thick she wondered if she'd imagined him entirely. "My sister," he repeated flatly. "I thought she was still in exile." "She returned this morning, Your Majesty. She says—" The guard hesitated. "She says she's come to meet your new mate." Something dangerous flickered in Severin's eyes. "Send her in." The woman who swept into the study was everything Revka was not. Tall, elegant, with silver hair cascading down her back and eyes the same pale gray as her brother's. She moved like a predator, all coiled grace and barely concealed threat, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Revka with unmistakable contempt. "So," Thessaly said, her voice honey-poured over broken glass, "this is the hollow they're all whispering about." "Thessaly," Severin's tone carried a warning. "You were told not to return, and you were told not to bring cursed creatures into the palace, yet here we are." She circled Revka slowly, studying her like a specimen. No scent, no presence, no worth. "Tell me, brother, have you truly grown so desperate that you'd mate with an empty vessel?" Revka held her ground, refusing to flinch. "I wouldn't expect you to understand," Severin said coldly. "You've never cared about anyone but yourself. And you've never been able to see past your obsession with that doomed child." Thessaly stopped in front of Revka, close enough that her perfume, cloying and sweet, filled Revka's nose. "Do you know what you are, little hollow? Do you understand what he's really using you for?" "Enough," Severin growled. "She's a sacrifice," Thessaly continued, ignoring him. "A vessel to absorb a curse that's killed dozens before her. And when she fails, because she will fail, you'll find another hollow and try again. That's all you are to him, girl. A body to throw at an ancient mistake." The words hit like blows, each one landing exactly where it was meant to hurt. But Revka had endured worse. She'd endured a lifetime of worse. "If I'm nothing," she said quietly, "then I have nothing to lose." Thessaly's eyes narrowed. "Get out," Severin ordered, stepping between them. "Return to your exile, Thessaly. If I see you in this palace again, I'll have you arrested." "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." Brother and sister stared at each other, the air between them crackling with barely contained violence. Finally Thessaly smiled, a cold, cruel expression that made Revka's skin crawl. "Very well," she said. "I'll leave. For now." She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. "But remember what I said, little hollow. He's not trying to save anyone. He's trying to undo a curse that can't be undone. And when you finally understand that—" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Revka could hear. "You'll wish you'd stayed in that gutter where you belonged." Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her. Revka stood frozen, her pulse racing, Thessaly's words echoing in her skull. A sacrifice. A body to throw at an ancient mistake. "Don't listen to her." Severin's voice was rough. "She's bitter, angry, twisted by jealousy. She says things to cause pain. Is she wrong? Revka turned to face him. Am I just another attempt? Have there been others before me? Severin's silence was answer enough. How many? Still nothing. Severin. How many hollow omegas have you tried to bind to your son? The king's jaw tightened. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. 3. Revka's blood turned to ice. And what happened to them? Severin looked away, toward the fire, toward the shadows, toward anywhere but her face. They died, he said. All of them. They tried to absorb the curse, and it killed them. He turned back to her, and in his eyes she saw something that might have been grief, or guilt, or both. But you're different. I can feel it. The way Oren responds to you, the way the curse reacts in your presence. You're stronger than they were. You have to be. And if I'm not? The question hung between them, unanswered, unanswerable. Somewhere in the palace, Oren began to cry, and Revka felt it like a hook in her chest, pulling her toward the child who had already claimed her. 3 hollow omegas, 3 dead women, and now her. She should run. She should leave this cursed palace and this desperate king and never look back. But she couldn't, because when she closed her eyes, she saw Oren's face, felt his small fingers curling around hers, heard his voice, thin and fragile and full of hope. Mama. I'm not running, she said quietly. Whatever happens, I'm not running. Severin studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Then may the gods help us both, he said, because if my sister is right... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The mating ceremony was held at dawn, when the winter sun crept over the mountains and painted the frozen world in shades of pale gold. Revka stood before the altar in a gown of silver silk, her hair braided with frost flowers, her hand steady despite the terror coiling in her chest. The great hall of Valdrin was filled with nobles, dignitaries, and courtiers, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. She was hollow, scentless, nothing, and she was about to become their queen. The priest droned through the ancient words, his voice echoing off stone walls older than memory. Revka barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on Severin, standing beside her in ceremonial black, his pale gaze reflecting the candlelight like mirrors. He looked like winter incarnate, beautiful and brutal and utterly untouchable. Do you, Severin, Alpha King of Valdrin, take this woman as your mate, your queen, your bond? The priest intoned. I do. The words came without hesitation, without emotion, without anything resembling warmth. And do you, Revka of no house and no pack, take this man as your mate, your king, your bond? Revka's throat tightened. This was it, the moment of no return. I do, she said. The priest raised his hands. Then by the ancient laws that govern our kind, I pronounce you bound. Let no force, mortal or divine, sever what has been joined. He turned to Severin. You may claim your mate. The crowd leaned forward. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The physical claiming that would seal the bond, the bite that would mark her as his forever. Severin turned to face her. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and cupped her cheek. His touch was cold, as always. But there was something careful in it, something almost gentle. I won't bite you, he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. Not yet. Not until the binding ritual with Oren is complete. It could interfere with the connection. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by confusion. If he couldn't claim her properly, then what? Severin leaned closer, and his lips brushed her forehead. The touch was soft, barely there, lasting only a heartbeat. But Revka felt it like a brand, like fire against her skin. The crowd murmured in surprise. A kiss on the forehead? That was a gesture of protection, of cherishing, not the claiming bite they'd expected. She is mine, Severin announced, turning to face the assembly. My mate, my queen, mother to my heir. Any who challenge her authority challenge me. Silence. Then, one by one, the nobles bowed. Even the ones who hated her. Even the ones whose contempt had been written plainly on their faces. They bowed, because their king had commanded it, and no one defied the Alpha King of Valdrin. Revka should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow in an entirely new way. Mother to my heir, he'd called her. Not my beloved, not my chosen, just a function, a role. But wasn't that what she'd agreed to? The feast that followed was a blur of faces and names she couldn't remember. Nobles approached her with careful words and calculating eyes, each one trying to determine her weaknesses, her uses, her potential as an ally or enemy. Revka smiled and nodded and said nothing of substance. She'd learned long ago that silence was safer than speech. It was nearly midnight when she finally escaped to check on Oren. The cub was awake when she entered his chamber, sitting up in bed with a book open on his lap. His luminous eyes brightened the moment he saw her. Revka! He scrambled toward the edge of the bed, arms outstretched. You came. She caught him before he could fall, pulling him into her arms and holding him close. He was so small, so fragile, his bones like bird bones beneath her hands. Of course I came, she murmured against his hair. I'll always come. Papa said you're my new mama now. Oren pulled back to look at her face, his expression serious beyond his years. Is that true? Revka's chest constricted. If you want me to be. I do. He nodded firmly. My first mama is in the stars now, Lady Morvain told me, but she said I could have a new mama if I found someone who loved me enough. He tilted his head. Do you love me enough? The question, so simple and so devastating, nearly broke her. Yes, Revka whispered. I love you enough. Oren smiled, bright and pure and utterly trusting. Good. Then you're my mama now. He snuggled against her chest, and Revka held him, breathing in his scent, that faint trace of winter and wildflowers that was uniquely his. She'd only known this child for days, but already she couldn't imagine a world without him. Revka? Yes, little one? Will you sing me the star song? The one Lady Morvain sings when I can't sleep? Revka didn't know the star song, but she knew other songs, lullabies from her own childhood, from before she'd understood what being hollow meant, from before the world had taught her to be afraid. She began to sing, soft and low, a melody about moons and dreams and the gentle dark. Oren's breathing slowed, his small body growing heavy in her arms. She didn't notice Severin standing in the doorway until the song ended. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. Not cold, not distant. Something else. Something that made her pulse quicken despite herself. He asked you to sing, Severin said quietly, stepping into the room. He's never asked anyone but his mother to sing to him. Revka looked down at Oren's sleeping face. He needs comfort. I gave it. You gave him more than that. Severin moved closer, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. You gave him hope. I can see it in his face. He believes you can save him. Can I? The question hung between them. Severin knelt beside her, his eyes on his son. In the candlelight, the sharp lines of his face seemed softer somehow, more human. The binding ritual is tomorrow, he said. Lady Morvain has prepared everything. At midnight we'll attempt the connection. He paused. Are you afraid? Yes. The honesty surprised them both. Good, Severin said after a moment. Fear means you understand the stakes. The others. He stopped, his jaw tightening. They didn't understand. They thought the ritual would be simple. They underestimated the curse. And you think I won't? I think, he said slowly, that you're the first hollow I've met who seems to genuinely care whether she survives. Revka met his eyes. Is that so strange? The others were desperate, broken. They saw the binding as an escape, a way to finally mean something. They didn't fight to live. His gaze held hers, intense and searching. But you have something to fight for now. He looked at Oren, still sleeping peacefully in her arms. You have him, Severin finished quietly. Something shifted in Revka's chest, a warmth she didn't dare name. I should go, she said, carefully laying Oren back against his pillows. I need to rest before the ritual. Of course. Severin rose, stepping back to give her space. But as she moved toward the door, his voice stopped her. Revka. She turned. He stood by his son's bed, haloed by candlelight, looking nothing like the cold king who had knelt before her in the marketplace. He looked lost, uncertain, almost afraid. Thank you, he said, for the song, for everything. Revka nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled. But as she walked through the dark corridors toward her chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on her back, or the way her pulse had raced when he'd looked at her like she mattered. The binding ritual took place in the deepest chamber of the palace, a circular room carved from black stone and lit by a ring of pale blue flames that burned without heat. Revka stood in the center, wearing a simple white shift that left her arms and feet bare. The cold stone bit into her soles, but she barely noticed. Her entire being was focused on the small figure before her. Oren lay on an altar of polished obsidian, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. Runes had been painted on his skin in silver ink, spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with their own faint light. The ritual will hurt, Lady Morvain said, her voice echoing in the chamber. Both of you. The curse will resist being drawn out, it will fight. I understand, Revka said. Do you? The older woman's eyes were sharp. The others said they understood too. They screamed within seconds. One of them tried to run. She paused. She didn't make it to the door. Revka swallowed hard but held her ground. Severin stood at the edge of the chamber, his face carved from ice, his hands clasped behind his back. He hadn't spoken since the ritual began, but his eyes never left her. We begin, Lady Morvain announced. She began to chant in a language Revka didn't recognize, words that seemed to twist in the air like living things. The blue flames flickered, then surged higher, and the runes on Oren's skin began to glow. Place your hands on his chest, Lady Morvain commanded. Feel for the curse. It will be cold, colder than anything you've ever known. When you find it, pull. Revka approached the altar. Her hands trembled as she reached for Oren, but she forced them steady. The moment her palms touched his skin, she felt it. Cold. A cold so profound it burned, searing through her hands and up her arms like frozen lightning. She gasped, her vision blurring, but she didn't pull away. Find it, Lady Morvain urged. Find the source. Revka closed her eyes and pushed deeper, past the cold, past the pain, into the very essence of Oren's being. And there it was. A darkness coiled around his heart like a serpent, black and ancient and utterly malevolent. It pulsed with every beat of his heart, feeding on his life force, draining him drop by drop. This was the curse. This was what had killed generations of heirs. This was what she had to absorb. Revka reached for it. The curse struck back. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and blinding. She heard someone screaming and realized it was her. The darkness lashed at her, tearing at her mind, trying to drive her out. But beneath the agony, she felt something else. Orin. His small presence, flickering like a candle in a storm, reaching for her with desperate, childlike trust. "Mama," she felt rather than heard. "Mama, don't let go." "I won't," she gasped. "I won't let go." She grabbed the curse with everything she had and pulled. The darkness came loose with a sound like tearing silk. It surged into her, cold and vicious, filling every hollow space within her being. Her vision went white. Her pulse stuttered. For one terrifying moment she was certain she was dying. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Revka collapsed to her knees, her hands sliding off Orin's chest. Her entire body shook. Her lungs burned with each breath. But she was alive. She was alive. It worked. Lady Morvain breathed. By the gods, it actually worked. Revka looked up at the altar. Orin's eyes were open, wide and clear and brighter than she'd ever seen them. The gray pallor had left his skin. His breathing was strong and steady. "Mama?" He sat up, looking at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I feel different. I feel good." "You are good," Revka managed, her voice hoarse. "You're going to be fine now." Orin scrambled off the altar and threw himself into her arms. She caught him, holding him tight, her vision blurring with emotion. Over his shoulder, she saw Severin. The king had moved closer, his icy composure cracked, his pale eyes glistening in the blue firelight. He looked at his son, alive and whole and laughing, and something in his expression shattered. "Orin," he said, his voice breaking on the name. The cub turned, saw his father, and launched himself across the chamber. Severin caught him, lifting him high, holding him as if he'd never let go. "Papa, Papa, I'm not tired anymore. I'm not hurting." "I know," Severin whispered, burying his face in his son's hair. "I know, my heart. I know." Revka watched them, her own chest swelling with something she couldn't name. The king, always so cold, so controlled, was weeping openly. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. And when he finally looked at her over Orin's head, his eyes held something she'd never seen in them before. Gratitude, wonder, devotion. "You did it," he said. "You saved him." Revka tried to smile, but her vision was dimming. The curse was inside her now, a cold weight settling into her bones. She could feel it coiling, testing its new prison. "I need," she started, but her legs gave out. Strong arms caught her before she hit the stone. Severin's arms. "Revka!" His voice was sharp with fear. "Revka, stay with me." "Just tired," she managed. "The curse, it's heavy." "Lady Morvain," Severin barked. "Help her." "The curse has transferred," Lady Morvain said, approaching with a vial of something glowing. "She'll need time to adjust. Her body isn't accustomed to carrying such darkness." "Will she survive?" The question was desperate, raw, nothing like the cold king who had declared he would never love her. "She's strong," Lady Morvain said, "stronger than the others. But the first night will be critical." Severin lifted Revka as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. His skin was cold, but somehow the contact steadied her, anchoring her to consciousness. "Papa?" Orin's voice was small, frightened. "Is Mama going to be okay?" "Yes," Severin said, and the word was a vow, a command, a prayer. "She's going to be fine." He carried her through the corridors, past startled servants and whispering guards, all the way to his own chambers. Not hers. His. The room was larger than any space she'd ever occupied, dominated by a massive bed draped in furs and dark silk. Severin laid her down gently, carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Stay with me," he said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Just for tonight, so I can watch over you." The curse, Revka whispered. I can feel it moving inside me. Fighting, Severin corrected. It's fighting to find purchase. But you're holding it. You're containing it. He took her hand, his cold fingers wrapping around hers. Just keep holding, Revka. Just keep fighting. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was too tired, too weak, too hollow to fight anything. But his hand was warm now, or maybe she was cold. Either way, the contact grounded her. Tell me something, she murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Anything. To keep me anchored. Silence. Then softly. My mother used to sing to me, Severin said. Before she died. She had a voice like yours. Clear and true and full of something I could never name. He paused. I haven't thought about her voice in years. Not until I heard you singing to Oren. Revka's fingers tightened on his. What did she sing? Songs about summer, about warmth. His voice dropped. Things I've never been able to feel. Her eyes opened, meeting his. In the dim light of the fire, his face seemed softer, younger, achingly vulnerable. Why are you so cold? She asked. All the time, even your skin. Severin looked away. That's not a story for tonight. Then when? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. When you survive this, he said, when you wake up tomorrow and the curse hasn't consumed you, then I'll tell you everything. Promise? He looked at her, and something flickered in those winter-pale eyes, something that made her breath catch despite the darkness coiled inside her. I promise, he said. She held on to that promise as the night closed in. She held onto his hand, his voice, the cold anchor of his presence. And sometime before dawn, she finally surrendered to sleep. When Revka woke, Severin was still there. His head had fallen forward, his eyes closed, his hand still wrapped around hers. He'd stayed. All night, he'd stayed. And in that moment, Revka realized something terrifying. She was starting to feel something for this cold, broken king, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of love. She should pull away, should remember his words, his warning. I will never love you. You must never love me. But his hand was still holding hers, and despite everything, she didn't want to let go. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Revka's life. Oren recovered with astonishing speed. Within days, he was running through the palace corridors, laughing, playing, and being the child he'd never been allowed to be. The servants marveled at the transformation, the nobles whispered about miracles, and Revka watched from the shadows. The curse coiled inside her like a sleeping dragon, and tried not to think about how long the peace would last. Severin was different now, too. Not warmer, exactly. He was still the cold king, still distant with his court, still terrifying in his authority. But with her, something had shifted. He came to her chambers each evening, not for anything intimate, not for anything that crossed the lines of their contractual arrangement. He came to talk. About Oren, about the kingdom, about the trade negotiations that had stalled and the border disputes that never ended. He asked her opinion on matters of state, listened to her answers, considered her perspective. You see things differently, he said one night, when she'd suggested a compromise in a dispute between two feuding noble houses. You don't think like a noble or a royal. You think like someone who's actually lived in the world. Because I have, Revka said. I've been cold and hungry and afraid. I know what it's like to have nothing. And now, you have everything. She looked around her chambers, at the silk and velvet and gold. Do I? Severin's gaze met hers. What do you lack? You, she thought but didn't say. Your heart. Your love. Nothing, she said instead. I lack nothing. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see straight through her lie. You're doing well, Severin continued. Better than I expected. Better than anyone expected. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. He rose from his chair, moving toward the fire. The light played across his features, softening the sharp edges. I've been thinking about what you asked. That night after the binding? Revka's pulse quickened. About why you're always cold? Yes. He stared into the flames, his hands clasped behind his back. You've carried the curse for weeks now. You've felt its weight, its hunger. You know what darkness feels like. I do. Then perhaps you're ready to understand mine. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw centuries of grief. The curse that plagued the heirs, he said quietly. It wasn't the only bargain my ancestor made. He made two. One for his heirs, and one for himself. Revka's blood ran cold. The first curse took the children, Severin continued, but the second curse took something else. It took our warmth, our capacity for love. He touched his own chest right above his heart. Every king of my line is born cold, not just physically, emotionally. We cannot feel love. We cannot feel warmth. We are winter-given flesh. Revka rose slowly, her mind reeling. You said you would never love me. Because I can't. His voice was raw. I am incapable of it. The curse made certain of that. He laughed, bitter and broken. My father never loved my mother. My grandfather never loved his. We take mates, we produce heirs, and we play the role of devoted husbands. But we feel nothing. We're empty. Hollow, Revka whispered. Yes. His eyes met hers. Like you. The irony crashed over her like a wave. She was hollow because she had no scent. He was hollow because he had no heart. Two empty vessels, bound together by ancient curses and desperate bargains. But you care about Orin, she said. I've seen it. The way you look at him, the way you held him after the binding. I care about his survival, Severin interrupted. I care about the continuation of my line, the stability of my kingdom. But love? He shook his head. I don't know what love feels like. I've never known. Revka crossed the room without thinking, stopping an arm's length from him. Up close, she could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. You're lying, she said softly. He flinched. What? You're lying to yourself. She reached up slowly and placed her hand over his heart. Through the fabric of his shirt, she felt it beating, strong and steady. And cold. So cold. You feel something, she continued. I can see it. Every time you look at Orin, every time you speak to me, you feel something, Severin. The curse may have frozen it, may have buried it so deep you don't recognize it anymore. But it's there. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not. Her hand was still on his chest, and she could feel his heart racing now, faster than before. But I know what it's like to be told you're empty, to believe it, to accept it as truth. She stepped closer. I was hollow, remember? Nothing but absence. That's what everyone told me. That's what I believed. She met his eyes. Until Orin called me Mama. Until you looked at me like I mattered. Until I started to feel something I'd never felt before. Severin's hand came up, covering hers against his chest. Revka. Her name was a warning, a plea. Don't. Don't what? Don't care about me. His voice cracked. Don't start feeling things you can't take back. The curse I carry isn't just about coldness. It's about destruction. Everyone who's ever loved a king of Valdrin has suffered for it. My mother, my son's mother, everyone. What happened to them? He was silent for a long moment. They felt what we couldn't, he finally said. They loved us with everything they had. And when they realized we could never love them back, it broke them. He paused, his voice dropping. My mother lived long enough to raise me, to love my father despite knowing he could never love her back. And when the weight of that one-sided love became unbearable, she threw herself from the cliffs. Oren's mother faded away within weeks of his birth, refusing to eat, refusing to live in a world where her love would never be returned. Revka's breath caught in her throat. So you push everyone away, she said. To protect them. To protect you. His hand tightened on hers. I've already taken so much from you, Revka. Your freedom, your future. I won't take your heart too. I won't let you love a man who can't love you back. What if it's too late? The words slipped out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a declaration of war. Severin went rigid. It's not, he said. It can't be. And if it is? He pulled away, turning his back to her, his shoulders tight with tension. Then you're a fool, he said harshly, and I'm a monster for letting it happen. Revka stood frozen, her hand still raised where it had rested against his chest. The rejection stung, but beneath the pain, she felt something else. He wasn't just pushing her away. He was terrified. Terrified of what might happen if he let himself feel. Terrified of breaking her the way his curse had broken everyone else. Terrified of the hope he didn't believe he deserved. You're not a monster, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. Go to sleep, Revka. Tomorrow will be long. The envoy from Kestria arrives at noon, and you'll need to be present. She recognized the dismissal for what it was. A retreat. A defense. She let him have it. Good night, Severin, she said, and left. But as she walked through the dark corridors toward her chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling of his heart racing beneath her palm. The way his breath had caught when she'd stepped closer. The desperation in his voice when he'd told her not to care. He felt something. She was certain of it now. The curse had frozen it, buried it, and convinced him it didn't exist. But it was there, waiting. I love him, she realized, the truth settling into her bones like a fever. I love him, and he doesn't think he can love me back. She pushed open the door to her chambers, her mind churning. And then she saw it, her reflection in the mirror. The pale oval of her face, the dark fall of her hair. And there, spreading across her collarbone like frost across a window, a mark she'd never seen before. Silver lines, branching and spiraling, glowing faintly in the darkness. The curse. It was growing. It was no longer content to sleep inside her. It was claiming her, marking her, making her its own. Revka touched the mark with trembling fingers, and the cold bit into her skin like teeth. No, she whispered. Not yet. Not now. But the curse didn't care about timing. It didn't care about love or hope or desperate bargains. It only knew hunger. And it was waking up. The mark spread faster than Revka could have imagined. Within 3 days, the silver lines had crawled from her collarbone to her shoulders, down her arms, across her back. They pulsed with cold light whenever she touched Oren, whenever she entered Severin's presence, whenever her pulse beat too fast with emotions she couldn't control. She hid it beneath high-necked gowns and long sleeves. She smiled through court functions and diplomatic meetings. She played the role of queen, while her body slowly transformed into something else entirely. But she couldn't hide from Lady Morvain. You're dying, the older woman said flatly, examining the marks in the privacy of Revka's chambers. The curse is consuming you from the inside out. How long do I have? Weeks, maybe less. Lady Morvain's fingers traced one of the silver lines, her expression grim. The others deteriorated faster, but they also held less of the curse. You absorbed more than any of them. You're containing more darkness than any hollow should be able to carry. Revka stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was pale, thin, with shadows beneath her eyes that makeup couldn't conceal. But her gaze was steady, Does Severin know? Not yet. Lady Morvain hesitated. Do you want me to tell him? No. The word came out sharper than intended. He's finally happy. He spends hours with Orin now, playing, laughing. I've never seen him like this. I won't take that away from him. Even if keeping silent kills you, my life has never mattered. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. I was nothing before this. A hollow. A ghost. At least now my death will mean something. Lady Morvain was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than Revka had ever heard it. You're wrong, she said. You matter more than you know. To Orin. To the kingdom. She paused. To him. Revka's chest tightened. He can't love me. He told me himself. What he told you, Lady Morvain said carefully, is what he's been told his entire life. What he believes because believing otherwise is too painful. She moved toward the door. But beliefs can be wrong, child. Curses can be broken. And sometimes the people who insist they cannot feel are the ones who feel most deeply of all. She left without another word. That evening, Orin insisted on a family dinner. Real family dinner, he declared, bouncing on his heels with the energy of a child who had never had energy before. With Mama and Papa and nobody else. They ate in Severin's private dining room. Orin chattered endlessly about his lessons, his new sword practice, the puppy he'd found in the stables, and desperately wanted to keep. His name is Thunder, Orin announced, because he's loud. Puppies require responsibility, Severin said, but there was no sternness in his voice. I will, I promise. Orin turned to Revka. Mama, tell Papa I'm responsible. Revka laughed, and for a moment she forgot about the curse, forgot about the marks spreading across her skin, and forgot about everything except this beautiful, precious child who had claimed her heart. He's very responsible, she said solemnly, for a child not yet 4. Severin's lips twitched. Then I suppose Thunder may stay. After dinner, she sang Orin to sleep. She sat with him for a long time, watching him breathe, memorizing the peaceful rise and fall of his chest. You're crying, she startled, turning to find Severin in the doorway. I'm fine, she said quickly, wiping her cheeks. You're not. He entered the room, moving to stand beside her. You've been hiding something. For days now. Don't think I haven't noticed. Severin. Show me. Revka's hands trembled as she reached for the high collar of her gown. Slowly she pulled it down, revealing the silver marks that now covered her throat and chest like intricate lacework. Severin's breath caught. How long? He demanded, his voice rough. Since the night we talked. About your curse. Weeks. The word was an accusation. You've been hiding this for weeks? I didn't want to worry you. Worry me? He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to face him. His eyes blazed with something she'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration. Something raw. Something that looked almost like terror. You're dying, Revka. The curse is killing you. And you didn't think I should know? What difference would it make? Because I cannot lose you, Severin finally said. Each word dragged from somewhere deep. Because when I think of this palace without you, without your voice, your strength, your infuriating refusal to be afraid of me, I cannot breathe. Revka's pulse stopped. That's not possible, she whispered. You said you couldn't. I know what I said. I know what I believed. But something is happening, Revka. Something I don't understand. When I'm with you, the cold lessens. When you smile, I feel warmth I've never felt before. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cradle her face. I feel like I'm dying too, he finished. Severin, Revka breathed. I don't know if this is love, he said quietly. I don't know what love feels like. But I know I cannot exist in a world where you don't. Wetness spilled down her cheeks. The curse? Damn the curse. His thumbs brushed the moisture away. There has to be a way. His lips brushed hers, feather-light, questioning. She answered by pressing closer, deepening the kiss, pouring every ounce of feeling she had into the contact. His mouth was cold, but it warmed beneath hers. When they finally broke apart, they were both shaking. "I love you," Revka said, because there was no point in hiding anymore. He stared at her, his frost-pale eyes wide with wonder. "I think," he said slowly, as if the words were foreign to him, "I might love you too." The moment the words left his mouth, two things happened simultaneously. Revka's curse marks flared with blinding silver light, and Oren began to scream. They whirled toward the bed. The cub was convulsing, his small body arching off the mattress, his eyes rolled back in his head. Black veins were spreading across his skin, branching like lightning. "No," Severin gasped. "No, no, no." Revka ran to the bed, reaching for Oren, but the moment she touched him, agony exploded through her entire being. The curse inside her surged, fighting to return to its original host. "It's not contained anymore," she realized in horror. "Our feelings, the love, it destabilized something." Then a voice spoke from the doorway. How touching. How tragically, predictably touching. They turned. Thessaly stood in the entrance, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her pale eyes gleaming with triumph. "Sister," Severin growled. "What have you done? What needed to be done?" She stepped into the room. "Did you really think the curse was just about frozen hearts and dying heirs? Did you really think a hollow could contain it forever?" She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "The curse was never meant to be contained, brother. It was meant to be completed. And now that you've finally fallen in love, that's exactly what will happen." "Completed how?" Revka managed. Thessaly smiled, cold and cruel. "The original bargain had 3 parts," she said. 3 curses, not 2. The heirs die before they shift. The kings cannot love. And the third," she paused for effect. "If a king ever truly falls in love, the curse consumes not just the heir and the beloved, but the entire bloodline. Every wolf descended from that first king dies, including me." Horror crashed over Revka like a wave. "You want to die?" Severin demanded. "I want to be free." Thessaly's composure cracked. "Do you know what it's like, living in the shadow of this curse? Knowing I could never truly love, never be loved? I'd rather die than continue this travesty of an existence." Oren's screams faded to whimpers. His breathing was shallow, his skin ashen. "Please," Revka begged. "Please, he's just a child." "He's a cursed child," Thessaly said flatly. "Better to end his suffering now than let him grow into another frozen king." Severin moved. One moment he was beside Revka. The next, he had Thessaly by the throat. "Tell me how to stop it," he snarled. Thessaly laughed even as she choked. "You can't stop it. Nothing can." But Revka saw something in Thessaly's eyes, something beneath the madness. Fear. "She's lying," Revka gasped. "There's a way. There's always a way." Before anyone could respond, darkness erupted from within Revka. It poured out of her like a flood, filling the room with cold so profound that frost formed on the walls. She heard Severin shouting her name. She heard Oren whimpering. And beneath it all, she heard a voice. Ancient. Hungry. Amused. "So," the voice whispered, "you offer yourself. How delightfully unexpected." The darkness coalesced before her, taking shape. A woman's form, tall and terrible, made of shadow and starlight. "The witch," Revka breathed. "A fragment of her," the entity corrected. "Left behind when the bargain was struck. Waiting for someone foolish enough to try what you're trying. Can you break the curse?" "I could." The shadow witch tilted her head. "But why would I?" This curse has sustained me for 3 centuries. I'll give you a reason, Revka said. Myself. Completely. Take my hollow nature. Use it to sustain yourself instead of the curse. The Shadow Witch went still. You would surrender your essence, she said slowly. Become truly empty. If it saves them, yes. Revka, stop! Severin was fighting through the darkness. Don't do this. This isn't for my sake, Revka said. This is for yours. For Oren's. But before the Shadow Witch could respond, Severin stepped forward. Take me instead, he said. My line. 300 years of kings. If you take me, you take all of them. It should sustain you for centuries more. The Shadow Witch studied him with something that might have been respect. You love her, she said. Truly. Despite what I did to your bloodline. Because of what you did, Severin countered. You froze my heart, but she thawed it. Whatever power you have, it's nothing compared to what she gave me. The Shadow Witch began to laugh. Oh, this is precious, she said. Do you know how many centuries I've waited for someone to surprise me? A frozen king declaring love, willing to die for a hollow Omega. She clasped her hands together. It's almost enough to make me reconsider. Then reconsider, Revka said desperately. Please. The witch was silent for a long moment. Very well, she finally said. I'll give you a chance. Not out of kindness, but out of curiosity. What kind of chance? The curse was created with 3 parts. It can only be broken with 3 sacrifices. She held up a shadowy finger. First, the hollow must accept the curse not as a burden, but as a gift, must claim it as her own, wholly and willingly. A second finger. Second, the frozen king must feel genuine love, born of true connection. He must admit it aloud, in front of witnesses. A third finger. And third, the dying heir must choose to live, not cling to life out of fear, but choose it actively. And if we do all 3? Revka asked. Then the curse breaks. The Shadow Witch smiled. But if you fail even one, you all die. Around them, the room had filled with people. Lady Morvain, guards, servants, all drawn by the explosion of light, witnesses. Severin rose to his feet and faced them. I have spent my entire life believing I was incapable of love, he said, his voice carrying through the silence. The curse told me my heart was frozen. Everyone told me that kings did not feel, could not feel, should not feel. He turned to look at Revka. They were wrong. He crossed to her, kneeling beside the bed. I love you, Revka. Not because the curse is breaking, not because I'm supposed to, but because you taught me what love means. You saved my son, and in doing so, you saved me. He took her hand. I love you, he repeated, louder now for everyone to hear. And I will love you until the day I die, curse or no curse. The witnesses stirred. Lady Morvain was weeping openly. 2 challenges complete, the Shadow Witch announced. Only one remains. The hollow must accept the curse as a gift. Revka looked at Oren, barely breathing. She looked at Severin, his eyes full of love and fear and hope. I don't understand, she said. How can darkness be a gift? Perhaps, Lady Morvain said quietly. It depends on what you do with it. You took his darkness into yourself and gave him light. You transformed burden into purpose. Because you're fighting it, Severin added softly. What if you stopped fighting? What if you accepted it as part of yourself? Whole. The word echoed in Revka's mind. She had never been whole. She had always been missing something. Empty. Incomplete. But now she had Oren. She had Severin. She had people who loved her. Maybe the curse wasn't taking from her. Maybe it was filling the emptiness. Revka closed her eyes. She reached for the darkness coiled inside her, and instead of pushing it away, she drew it close. You are part of me now, she whispered, Not my burden. Not my enemy. My gift. The curse shuddered. Then, slowly, impossibly, it began to change. The cold became warmth. The darkness became light. The hunger became fullness. Revka gasped as power flooded through her. When she opened her eyes, the marks on her skin had transformed from silver to gold, spiraling across her body like blessing. 3 challenges complete, the Shadow Witch's voice rang out. The curse is broken. But Oren still lay motionless. The heir, Revka gasped. He still has to choose. She gathered him into her arms. Oren, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, pale and luminous, but fading. Mama? His voice was a thread. I need you to choose, she said. The curse is trying to take you away, but you can fight it. You can choose to stay. How? By wanting to. By deciding that you want to live. If I choose to stay, he said slowly. Will you stay too? Always, Revka promised. Forever, Severin swore. Oren closed his eyes. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, so quietly they almost missed it, he whispered, I choose to live. Light erupted from his small body, pure, blinding gold. It filled the room, driving back the darkness completely. The black veins retreated. His color returned. His breathing steadied. The Shadow Witch's form collapsed inward, swirling into a single point of shadow. You've done what no one in 3 centuries has managed, she said. You've unmade my greatest creation. There was no anger in her voice, only wonder. Perhaps love truly is stronger than any curse. She turned toward Thessaly. She carries no curse, the witch said. Only guilt, only grief, only the weight of believing she was broken. She is as capable of love as anyone. She simply never believed she deserved it. Thessaly made a choked sound, and then the shadow was gone. The dawn came golden and warm, the first true warmth Valdrin had felt in 300 years. Revka stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the sun rise over a changed kingdom. The perpetual winter that had gripped the land was already beginning to fade. Flowers were blooming in the gardens below. Birds sang in trees that had been frozen for centuries. The curse was truly broken. You should be sleeping. She turned to find Severin approaching, Oren perched on his shoulders. The cub was laughing, his pale eyes bright, his cheeks flushed with health. So should you, she replied. I tried. Severin lifted Oren down. But someone insisted on seeing the sunrise. It's pretty, Oren declared, running to the balcony railing. Look, Mama, the sky is pink. It's beautiful, Revka agreed, her throat tight with emotion. Severin moved to stand beside her, his arms sliding around her waist. The touch was natural now, easy in a way it had never been before. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Revka considered the question. The golden marks still covered her skin, but they no longer burned. They pulsed gently with warmth, with life, with power she was only beginning to understand. Different, she said. Complete. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her cheeks. I spent my entire life believing I was frozen, he said. But when I look at you, when I hold you, I feel fire. He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise. His lips were warm, the first time she'd ever felt warmth from him, and she melted into the contact. Ew, Oren announced. Papa's kissing Mama. They broke apart, laughing. You'll understand when you're older, Severin told his son. I don't want to understand. Kissing is gross. Is it? Revka knelt down. What about this? She peppered his face with kisses until he was shrieking with laughter. Stop, I yield. She pulled him into a proper hug, breathing in his scent, feeling his healthy heart against hers, her son. Not by blood, but by choice. By love. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. The perpetual winter retreated fully, revealing a kingdom of stunning beauty. Rivers flowed again. Crops grew again. The people of Valdrin emerged from their cold existence, blinking in the unfamiliar warmth. And at the center of it all stood Revka, no longer hollow, no longer nothing. The golden marks had revealed a gift, the ability to heal, to take pain and transform it into peace. She spent hours in the healing halls, learning to control her power. "You're going to exhaust yourself," Lady Morvain scolded one evening. "I'm fine." "Today," Severin's voice came from the doorway. "Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor. I'm the king." He crossed to her, taking her glowing hands in his. "And I'm ordering you to come to dinner with your family." She wanted to argue, but his hands were warm and his eyes were soft. "Fine," she relented. Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. Oren chattered about his sword lessons, his puppy, his new friend from the village. Thessaly, welcomed back to the palace after months of proving her changed heart through actions rather than words, added dry comments that made Revka laugh. Lady Morvain presided over everything with fond exasperation, and Severin sat beside Revka, his hand resting on her knee beneath the table. After dinner, when Oren had been put to bed, Severin led her to the balcony where they'd watched the first sunrise together. The sky was full of stars now, the heavens finally visible without the curtain of eternal winter. "I have something for you," Severin said. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Revka's breath caught. "Our first ceremony was political," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring of twisted gold and silver, set with a stone that seemed to hold starlight within its depths. A bargain, a transaction. But this... He took her hand. "This is real. Severin." "Revka of no house and no pack," he said, sinking to one knee. "Revka, who saved my son, who broke my curse, who thawed my frozen heart. Will you marry me? Not for politics, not for duty, but because I love you, and I cannot imagine my life without you." Her vision blurred with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I spent 300 years cursed to never love," he murmured. "I would endure 300 more if it meant finding you at the end." "Let's not test that theory," Revka said. He laughed, pulling her close. They stood together beneath the stars, the hollow Omega and the frozen king, two broken people made whole by love. Behind them, in the warmth of the palace, their son slept peacefully, his puppy curled at his feet. Before them, the kingdom of Valdrin stretched into a future full of possibility, and above them, the stars burned bright. Witnesses to a love that had broken every curse, defied every prophecy, and proven once and for all that some things were stronger than darkness. Some things were eternal. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments what you thought. I always read every single one, and they mean more than you know. When the Omega girl held the dying cub in her arms, the Alpha King fell to his knees. But what happened next changed everything, not just for them, but for an entire kingdom.